Hello and welcome to Planet Waves TV for Tuesday, May 31st, 2016. My name's Eric Francis, here with the latest astrology news for you, and that is quite a bit of big news. But before I go there, I want to remind you that I have a class I'm offering called Find Yourself, the Astrology of Now, and that's going to be taught on Saturday, June 18th, 2016. I'll tell you more about that at the end of the program. Sign-up information is at the top of planetwaves.fm. Today, I'm here to talk about two things mainly. They are related in this kind of obscure way. One of them is the Gemini new moon that is coming up, and that happens on Saturday, the 4th of June. That's just coming up in a few days. And one of the reasons why this is an unusual new moon is that it involves a grand cross aspect. That is to say, planets are going to be covering all four of the mutable signs. Major planets are going to be covering all four of the mutable signs, and that includes the Sun, the Moon, and Venus coming through Gemini. Here's what that looks like. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I don't think my diagram was quite up to the task, but this one is a little bit better. It's handwritten. You can make things bigger. All right. So first of all, that is the new moon. It's a conjunction of the moon and the sun, but Venus is going to be right in there in the exact degree of the new moon. So that in itself is unusual, that there's going to be a new moon conjunct Venus. All by itself, that would be something worth writing about, except there's a lot of other things going on. We are currently in the midst of two major, let's say, transpersonal planetary aspects. And Neptune is not exactly transpersonal, but compared to lots of other things, it's pretty close in. Okay, so the first thing that's happening is that this is the year of the square of Saturn and Neptune. This is a fairly rare thing. The Saturn-Neptune cycle is a pretty long cycle. It's like the total Saturn-Neptune cycle is probably about 35 years. So anything that happens involving Saturn and Neptune happens once every 35 years. And then there are the major points of that, and one of them is the square. And as you can see here, Saturn is in Sagittarius, Neptune is in Pisces, so it's at the last quarter phase. At the same time, Jupiter is square Saturn, and that is at the last quarter phase. So we have two quarter phases, both involving Saturn. That's interesting because Saturn works on that, what's called the fourth harmonic, I believe, where everything can be sorted out on a 90-degree dial, and this chart works beautifully as that. So either one of these, the Jupiter square Saturn aspect, which happens something like, I guess, around twice during the 20-year cycle of Saturn, and then the Saturn-Neptune square, which happens twice during the much longer cycle of Saturn and Neptune. This is Jupiter and Saturn, sorry. They're both up at the same time, and there's similar structure, and there's what's called a T-square in the sky right now. The T-square consists of Neptune, Saturn, and Jupiter. It's just kind of waiting around for something to show up in Gemini and kind of fill in the last portion of that square, and that is exactly what happens. And so we get something that tends to lurk in the background of consciousness, even though these are visible planets, Jupiter and Saturn. Neptune is not visible, and Neptune can throw a kind of a cloak of invisibility over the whole thing, but instead of being obvious and in your face, that just puts it slightly below the level of consciousness, and you don't necessarily feel what's going on until another factor, something much more palpable, something much more available to normal waking consciousness, comes along and brings the whole thing out to the front. And that's exactly what's happening with Saturday's new moon in Gemini. So none of these planets as of today is close enough to any of these to actually constitute a square, but when or opposition, but when they line up at the end of the week, it's going to happen very quickly. They are all going to be in aspect. And this is a highly unusual grand cross aspect. They happen from time to time. If you're counting asteroids and minor planets, there's certainly one going on all the time. But here we have mostly planets of antiquity which are the most obvious things in astrology. They are the things that constitute the figure that is in front of the background, and then there's Neptune, which is something of a function of the background. But then these pop the whole aspect pattern. Now, what does this really mean? What is this suggesting? Well, the theme I've been basically building about this is, remember that it's something happening in the mutable signs, and the focal point of the whole thing, the fast-moving thing, the trigger aspect of the whole thing is coming from Gemini. And so we have something of a study in thought, consciousness, and communication. Planet Waves is the name of a website, but it's also a thing. There's this kind of vibratory frequency that is available to people. Teilhard de Chardin, a very intelligent monk who lived not that long ago, had this concept that there was this thing called the noosphere, Noosphere, which is the sphere of all intelligence that surrounds the Earth, all data, all intelligence, ranging from DNA to the contents of your blog, are all contained in the noosphere. And so the noosphere is the sphere of what I call living information. And astrology is part of the noosphere. Your consciousness is part of the noosphere. The awareness level, the emotional tenor, the let's say vibratory frequency, the state of mind, the mood, the feelings of the people that you are hanging around with are all part of the noosphere, and you are sensitive to that. You are sensitive to your environment. So a lot of what I'm describing when I describe an aspect like this that's not specifically referencing anything in anyone's natal chart is an environmental factor. What we get with an environmental factor, first of all, is a description. It's happening in the mutable signs involving a lot of large, kind of obvious planets and a couple of things like the Sun, the Moon, and Venus, which are much more on the level of personal expression, emotion, creativity. This is something that is in the environment. Now, I haven't been all like witchy voodoo and bad news about this square, because personally I don't feel that way, but I would caution you that there are ways to interpret a grand square that make it sound like the worst thing in the world is going to happen. I have not found that to be true, but what I have found from lots of experience studying these aspects is that there's often something in our minds that's worth paying attention to. And by our minds, I mean something of the collective mind of the people around you, and then you as an individual will get to tune into that and feel that, experience that, contribute to it potentially in positive ways, potentially in negative ways. Not really possible to contribute in a neutral way, since there are no neutral thoughts. And so you are going to be in an environment, indeed you are in one now, where this aspect pattern is present. And it could represent various kinds of drama. It could represent various kinds of, let's say, drama on the subject of blockage, because squares tend to represent places where people get stuck. But when you put four squares together, or like this whole diversity, a lot more than four squares in that pattern, but when you cover all of the signs, especially with planets that are among the very largest planets and among those that are like the main touchstones for people. Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune all provide reference points into civilization and consciousness that are major touchstones. And when you set the whole thing off with a powerful new moon with Venus added in to boot, there can be an acceleration of these processes. The sound of the chatter, the sound of the debate, the scale of a perceived problem, all can be shifting around and making you wonder what the heck is going on. And that is a very good question to ask yourself, because there is no inevitability as long as there is willingness to contemplate what is happening. And so the message of this aspect is to contemplate what is happening, to bring not only your reasoning, rational mind, but to bring your feelings, your intuition, and a measure of emotion. And one of the things that's saying that is that we have Venus, the Sun, and the Moon showing up in Gemini, the sign that is the most connected to what you might think of as the day-to-day basic level of intelligence, communication, reasoning, and rationalizing. And because we have the sun there, we get a kind of bit of information that says, take command of this, take charge, and make this something that you express rather than something that you are subjected to. And then the moon and Venus there are saying, bring your emotional intelligence, Venus, bring your feelings and your intuitive body, the moon, and basically be working on all of your planetary circuits. Don't shut down any of your planetary circuits. In the most recent edition of Planet Waves, distributed on Thursday night, I described an approach to understanding media that was taught by Marshall McLuhan, and he put out a very straightforward and simple theory, which is that the communication devices that we use are extensions of ourselves. And so this microphone, the mighty KSM-32, is an extension of your ear, and it is therefore your ear sitting in my office representing you, and I speak into your ear. The camera there is an extension of your eye. It is looking at me and seeing me as you are doing right now. But what Grandpa McLuhan said was, we tend to extend our senses, and then because it's too intense, we cut them off. I'm suggesting that you do the thing that artists do, which is to extend your senses, extend your sensitivity using the tools that you have, but leave yourself in the on position. Rather than cutting off, leave yourself in sensitive, aware, and focused state of mind. Now, what this new moon is likely to be describing is the kind of the cumulative results of these two slower moving aspects. These aspects here, that this one, they both last basically all year, and just wider orb than that. But let's say for now, they're aspects that are specific to 2016 and the immediately surrounding months of 2016, and that's going on in the background. If you leave your senses on and you leave your sensitivity on and you extend yourself and don't cut off, what you're likely to notice is some kind of a catch-up on all of these slower processes accelerated by this much quicker process happening. So pay attention and notice that. And in any situation you're in, stay close to your point of decision. Stay close to the place where you can decide to participate or not participate, to the place where you can contribute or not contribute, to the place where you have thought things through, or the place where you choose to not think things through. Be aware of what you're doing, and I would suggest, personally, being the kind of artsy type who likes to stay sensitive and kind of turn on rather than shut down when there is a little bit of extra input coming in. I'm suggesting that the message of the cue of this aspect is to leave your sensitivity in hyper-aware mode rather than dialing it back into sleepy time mode. The influence of sleepy time mode might be found in Neptune. Neptune has a way of making things go underground and seem less visible and less apparent. So you get the basic idea there. Pay attention to what you're saying. Pay attention to what people say. Better to let people speak and then respond to it than necessarily offer something up yourself. And, you know, when in doubt, start by listening and then notice the next thing that's going on. Now, also in this pattern, here's a little bit more complex version of this chart where I have left in Neptune, Saturn, and Jupiter, the slower movers, then some quick movers here. I've added another aspect pattern that's working in the background that includes 3 slow-moving planets. One of them is Uranus, which takes 86 years to go around the sun, 84 years, excuse me. Then the other is Eris, which I believe takes around 570 years. They've adjusted it a few times. I think it's 505, about 570. And then Pluto, just over 250 years. Real slow movers, really in the background. And despite the fact that these planets have long since been discovered and have many times over demonstrated their efficacy, I find that certain branches of astrology are less open to working with them, and the less you work with a tool, the less precise you are able to be with that tool. Now, Pluto in Capricorn is something we've lived with for quite a long time. It goes back to right around the time when Obama was elected, and there was a greed-driven collapse of the banks at that point, and a lot of people made a lot of money. A hell of a lot more people lost a lot of money, and we entered an age of a new gilded age. It's been building for a while, but we kind of now live in the age of you're only cool if you're a billionaire, and then you can do anything you please. That is one of the shadow messages of Pluto in Capricorn. We need to question that doctrine. We need to question, I believe, I'm suggesting as a teacher, suggesting that you question the doctrine of greed makes everything good. But the problem with that is that, you might be accused of being a communist or a socialist, which is an absolutely patently ridiculous thing to be accusing people of in 2016, since these philosophies are basically long since disproven. Bernie Sanders is not really a socialist. He's just more of a kind of a Christian Democrat, you might say, from German politics. Anyway, the question of the shadow side of Pluto in Capricorn is really one to consider carefully. And were you to take this on some non-shadow manifestation, the question would be more like, how is society changing, and where do I fit into these changes in society? There's a restructuring going on with Pluto in Capricorn. There has been for a while. The restructuring is not over. In fact, it may have just begun. And the question to ask is, where do you see yourself in the midst of that? Now, part of the issue with times we live in where there is so much change is that change is happening so fast that it is becoming difficult to predict anything, and it's becoming basically difficult to anticipate when, your part of the carousel is coming around, when you can jump on the carousel. Things are moving so fast, it's increasingly difficult to predict. So that leaves you with the option of being very clear about where you stand with yourself and with the world right now. But I think also it is essential to imagine how you would want the world to be. So that may be a form of prediction, but it's more of a creative prediction. And where do you find your place to wedge yourself into that, where you want things to be? Or are you really brilliant at this and find some clear, wide open space where you see room for yourself and to establish yourself? But remember that the supporting structures are all changing, and we're all being called upon to be more independent in our relationship to supporting structures. That means dealing with your relationship with mom and dad. Now, part one of my discussion on the Uranus-Eris square, I'm going to introduce it right now. Been talking about it for a while. This probably calls for a special edition to focus on this, because there's like always stuff in the foreground. This is very much a factor of the background. And the thing about the background is, since this is in the sign Aries, the question is, what are the ways that values and attitudes are changing, and what is the way in which values and attitudes have changed that you can benefit from understanding and knowing about? And this is not an easy thing to think about, because we are doing an analysis of where we fit in. We each as an individual fit into the process of values and attitudes changing at the same time we are being changed. And one of the things I think is clear about the Uranus-Eris conjunction is that it has something to do with the way that our minds and our self-concept are being formed in the environment of the internet. It is a very different thing for me to be sitting here in my office speaking to thousands of whatever people on the internet, basically with very little in the way of broadcasting infrastructure. I have, a little bit better than household equipment, but anybody pretty much with a computer can do what I'm doing now. But the question is, how does that change us? How does that change our minds? How does it change your sense of your role in the world? I will give you one clue: think deeper and think bigger. I know from a lot of experience, when I suggest these things of like, what's your relationship to things? Ask yourself that question. The answers that come back tend to be on a fairly small scale. Having access to the internet doesn't just mean that you get more options for, what kind of tank top or iced tea that you want. It doesn't just mean that you get to buy your gluten-free pasta off of Amazon instead of driving to the health food store. There's something else. There is something different about the way that your self-concept is changing, and it's not necessarily changing for the better. With a lot of emphasis on Aries, particularly Uranus in Aries, there can be an obsession with image. There can be an obsession with the glamour of things, and you're inserting yourself into the glamour of things in a certain way. Or you might be on another end of the equation where you're just getting sick of all the glamour and you want things to be more down to earth. In any event, you are responding to all of that, and you're responding as part of your total environment and your total consciousness. So what's happening is large on the internal scale in terms of how it influences you. It's influencing all of you, and whatever this Uranus-Eris thing is, large in that it is influencing the whole world. This is really interesting, and we're alive in a wild time. And don't forget that while we're having this discussion of Uranus and Eris and how self-concept is changing and how it is we're, in a sense, being kind of constantly varnished every minute of every day with the impulse to glamorize ourselves in some way. There is this Pluto thing going on in the background where apparently all traditions are failing, and where there is no special need seen by particularly many people at all to honor anything about the past. Now, that can be done. In some ways, it's a spiritually very advantageous place to be, but not honoring anything about the past, which may or may not be true for you, requires you to be fully present and imaginative in who you are in the present, and that is one of the subtexts of the Uranus-Eris conjunction. It's saying, call yourself fully present into the moment. More on that in what's likely to be a special edition of Planet Waves TV. Let's go back to the present, the now. I'm going to be doing a class which is planned as a video class called Find Yourself, the Astrology of Now. Short version of this is there's basically two ways to do astrology. One way to do astrology involves the natal chart. The natal chart has many derivatives like the progress chart and transits to that, but it's all referenced in the past. It's all referenced in some legacy material called the natal chart. The natal chart is important, but it's not the only way to do astrology. In fact, there's another way to do astrology, which is this way, which involves looking at planets in their positions in the present moment and what that tells us about ourselves and what ideas we can get for what we can do, what we can accomplish, who we can be, what options and opportunities we see that lead to a greater state of creativity, flexibility, and awareness. And that is what I will be offering as a teaching in this 3-hour program on Saturday, the 18th of June at noon, Eastern Daylight Time, called Find Yourself, the Astrology of Now. Cool title. It'll be a cool class. I teach really great classes. You can hear old ones on the internet or just ask around. All right, that's what I have to say to you for today. I will see you very soon, or be speaking to you very soon. Planet Waves FM, that'll be running on schedule this week. Great to be in contact. Bye for now.